Toxic bosses and toxic work environments. We're going to talk about 5 things you should stop doing on this episode. If this is your first time here, I'm Dr. Khalil Hussein. I'm a full-time double board certified trauma surgeon and the founder of Defiance Academy. This podcast and the book it's becoming is built on one idea, a career strategy for women the rules weren't written for. I'm excited to introduce our guest for today. Her name is Mona Hussein. She's a chemical engineer and she has been in the field for over 10 years. Welcome to the podcast, Mona.
Thank you.
How did the journey start?
So I first went into Prairie University with a mindset of going into biology. I wanted to be a doctor, kind of like you. Quickly realized that that wasn't the path for me. Completed my bachelor's in biology and then turned around and really started getting interested in getting a chemical engineering degree. And at that point, it was like, hey, why not try to do a master's while I'm still in school anyways? So I took the time to actually invest in that and quickly decided that I wanted to be a chemical engineer and started taking the courses. I really enjoyed what I was doing versus being in the biology field. I was more so drawn into chemistry and engineering aspects of things and how to fix things. After that, I kind of just took off and graduated, landed a very big role way before I even graduated college. So that was pretty exciting.
How did you land a big role before you graduated?
It was pretty much late nights. I actually drove one day to Texas A&M University, and it was a 2.5-hour drive when I could barely drive on the highway in the snow when it never snows in Texas. Drove very, very carefully.
Yeah, I was about to say, it never snows in Texas.
It never snows in Texas. Back then, it never did. I don't know what happened, but we took quite some time just to get there and then just went for a conference. And from that conference, I landed an interview to an internship at the time. Quickly got that internship, did that for about I think it was about 8 months. Just went back to school, kept my head down, worked full time and went to school full time and just continued that grind and hustle that we all come to know. And then after that, I really started going into kind of what would set me different and aside from other people, right? So I started joining the NSBE conferences, which is National Society of Black Engineers. I spent every dollar I had being a broke college student just to get to California. Once I did that, a company ended up calling me and saying, hey, we'd like for you to come work for us. And got a plant tour, got the interview and, landed and sealed the job and moved out to Dallas for the first time, ended up moving out on my own. And you can only imagine what came with that. It was a
How was that?
It was a journey. I think it was the first time that I left the house and I didn't have anybody and, family fully had to trust me to be able to do the right things, and being a Muslim woman and being out on your own was a thing as well. But I think after quite some time, just being able to get into the work industry, I first started working for Pepsi, which was my pretty much a big major company that I started working for. Led one of
It's a big company.
It is. It was a great experience. I had actually gotten featured in the Women in Operations, and it was the first time that a woman of color, let alone being a Muslim woman, being nominated. I ended up on that article in closing out a $70 million project, and basically was the project manager at such a young age, not knowing and realizing that, but definitely being able to complete that and being able to complete it with my team, I think has been one of the biggest achievements, I'd say. After that, I had gotten a call from Coca-Cola and they were like, hey, would you like to come work for us? And I was like, sure, that sounds great. And I packed my bags and...
How did that feel? Tell me a little bit about that. How did that feel, you being offered this big role from this big major company?
I couldn't believe it. I actually was like, oh, okay, let me think about it. I was acting super cool about it, got off the phone.
What is there for you to think about?
I just didn't know.
It's amazing.
I didn't know. I think I was still young at the time as well, right? Where I just was like, okay, let me call you back. And, getting with my family and being like, Coca-Cola just called me. And they were like, how do you keep getting these big jobs? And I'm like, I don't know, but it's happening by the will of Allah. And, as I thought about it, and the more that I realized what my worth was, and packed my bags and moved to Waco, Texas, of all places. So that was an experience of itself as well. Yeah.
That's amazing, mashallah. So you've worked for Pepsi, you've worked for Coca-Cola. And how is it being a Muslim woman in these environments? You're now in big corporate America. How was that experience?
So when I first went into engineering school, I was more so of wearing my hijab, thinking, it's going to be great. Everybody's going to accept me. And then I started going into interviews, and the more interviews that I went to, the more I realized I wasn't getting calls back. And one day, one of my aunts sat me down and said, hey, maybe the headscarf that could be the barrier. And I was like, absolutely not. It can't be. And just not understanding that. So, sure enough, I actually went to my internship without my headscarf. And that was the first time. So, I was wearing my headscarf since I was 9 years old. That was the very first time I went without it. And sure enough, by the grace of God, the guy that interviewed me, his name was Muhammad. And he quickly realized that I was a Muslim. And he's like, hey, where's their job? And I told him, I said,
Wow.
this is
So
the
the
first
one
time I've
time you
never.
don't wear it.
Yep. And he says, hey, I want you to know that I see you for who you are. And no matter where you go, your identity should follow you. You should be yourself no matter where you go. And I think that hit home in being able to say, okay, I'm probably not going to get this job. And walking out of that interview, it was an internship, and just thinking to myself, what have I done? Like, I truly lost who I was. And it was just the peer pressure, society, what you're told, the barriers, and just really understanding that I was more than that. I hadn't even hit the door when I had actually gotten an offer from him and joining his team. And I think that was Allah's way of telling me, don't ever take it off and be true to who you are. So ever since then, I've realized that it's come in different variations, right? I've done the turban, I've done the, wearing it the proper way, and being in rooms and walking into rooms where you are the only Muslim Black woman. But then also, I believe it was Maya Angelou who once said, I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. And realizing that come as one, but I really do stand as 10,000, and living that and actually showing up that way every single day. So it's been a process. It's definitely been a process. And, it's your own journey that you go through as you wear the headscarf in whatever variation that you wear it in.
Right. That's one of the things that when it comes to being a woman and presenting yourself in interview situations, I've had mentees when they're being interviewed for medical school or residency get asked, as a woman, there are situations where regardless of what you do, you're punished for it, right?
Yeah.
You wear
Yeah.
the hijab, people discriminate against you for not wearing the hijab. You don't wear the hijab, you get interviewed by a Muslim man who says, hey, where's your hijab? Right. And this same exact thing actually happened to one of my mentees. She was being interviewed for a fellowship. She finished her residency and she was interviewed by a Muslim man. And he was like, why are you not wearing your hijab? Regardless of what you do, you're punished.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, alhamdulillah, the interaction you had with this Muslim man who was interviewing you, asked about your hijab, the way you interpreted is this is Allah's way of sending you a message saying, I got you. Your rizq is up to Allah. So this man said, don't ever take off your hijab again. Here's a job.
Pretty much. That's exactly how it
Mashallah.
played out.
All right. Wow. Okay. So now walk me through how it was being so young and being in a field where you're now, were you a plant director at the time?
I was a production supervisor. So I was
Production
working night
supervisors.
shift. And on night shift, you really don't have, that level of support. So you're the one who basically, your safety, your quality, your production, your everything under the sun. You're the plant director at nighttime because you can't just call in the middle of the night and ask a silly question, right? The expectations are that you're able to execute and that you're able to produce results. I think the age was definitely a thing where people, who would want to listen to a young lady, right? But then at that, a young Muslim Black Somali lady. And it took a while for people to understand that, okay, when I ask you to do something, it's either two options. Either we get the job done or I will hold team members accountable. I think it took a while for people to realize that I meant business. I remember the very first time I wrote somebody up and it spread like wildfire. But ever since then, I would get on the radio and I would say, hey, I need someone here. And all of a sudden you have 5 mechanics who are able to come over and help you out and show up and do their jobs. So it took a while to get that level of respect, but it was a daily struggle. Being in meetings was a daily struggle. Being reminded that there were meetings is a daily struggle. I remember one time we had a meeting and I had walked in and I hadn't realized that I wasn't a part of the meeting. And one of the young ladies, she's like, hey, Miss Moon, are you not in the meeting? And it kind of took me by surprise, just not realizing what she was talking about. And I actually went inside the meeting room and I sat down, I put my stuff down, and I remembered I had a seat at the table no matter what, whether I was invited to the meeting or not, right? So I positioned myself to sit through the meeting, take notes, ask questions, being able to follow up. After I was done with that meeting, I took my boss to the side and I was like, hey, did I miss something? And he's like, I just didn't have time. I totally forgot that, I had to let you know. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. But what I quickly realized is that my peer was invited to the meeting and it was her off day. And I was like, well, clearly you didn't forget. You couldn't have forgotten. So I kind of just questioned him again. And I was like, hey, so just help me understand how, she was able to get a phone call and I was coming to work and it was my day to work. And he was like, Muna, it just slipped my mind. I apologize. Knowing that wasn't the first time that I've been overlooked or, feeling like I wasn't a part of the team, I definitely reached out to my HR team to be able to speak up and say something about it. And then it was, mandated. It was an expectation that when we had meetings, that I was involved in every one of those meetings, especially if I'm your backup, right? When you're out
Mhm.
of the facility, I'm the person everyone comes to. So being able to be in the loop and have those open communications and those hard conversations and being able to stand up for yourself was something that I had to learn how to do, but I had to stand grounded in it as well.
So you and I had multiple conversations about navigating a workplace that really isn't designed for you. We've had multiple conversations over the years. And so I wanted to focus our conversation on navigating a toxic workplace. And a lot of times what I've seen is, especially when you go to conferences that are built for leadership trainings and women's empowerment, and especially diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, where they say we recruit a lot of diversity and we have a lot of minorities within the field. I've always felt that there was a lack of preparation for the actual workplace that you're walking into. So with the whole diversity initiatives, what we've done is we haven't touched the workplace. We didn't change the culture. We didn't do anything. We just recruited a lot of diversity, a lot of people who don't have the networks and who don't know the politics into a workplace, and just said, figure it out. And when you face these situations, the advice that you get from common leadership conferences and women's empowerment conferences, a lot of the advice that you're given actually puts a lot of the work on you. And some of the advice actually puts a bigger target on you.
I would definitely have to agree with that. There are times where I've had to be the one to speak up and it was unpopular, right? And being able to say, hey, I stand by my decision. This is unsafe. Or I stand by my decision, and being a human first and showing that compassion, right? And being kind to one another. But at the same time, it's being able to come back and say, was this the right thing to do because it was an unpopular opinion? Or is diversity really diversity? I remember going to a conference and it was me and one other young lady in the room, and it was the CEO at the time stood up and said, we have diversity and we have inclusion. We'd like to go ahead and let Muna and, the other such and such young lady stand up. She was from Argentina and we were the only diversity in the
Two
room.
people.
It was just us. And we kind of just looked at each other and we're like, we're the diversity. And it was a room
Wow.
full of 120 people. And just looking at each other and being like, I guess we're the diversity.
You were the diversity hires, is what they're saying. And they said this publicly.
They said it publicly and they were so proud. And we were just laughing so hard because we're like, I guess we're the diversity. And then, we just felt like, man, we made it right at this point and being able to be recognized by the CEO, right? And at the end of the night, we had dinner with the CEO at the end of the night, right? And that experience was something within itself. I think that company went above and beyond to even fly us out there. I know they were having troubles with the weather and whatnot. And they sent out the private jet to come get us. And it
Wow.
was like, exactly. It was like, hey, we are the diversity who get to ride on private jet. and it still stays with us because we kind of look around and we're like, okay, how do we get more of us in rooms? How do we mentor the next set of youngs that are coming in, that are, young women that are coming in, and how do we communicate? How do we give them, hey, this is, definitely what you do in the workshops that you've created. And the many conversations that we've had have definitely shaped my mindset when it comes to the way I show up at work, when to speak up. I think you and I have had those conversations where I've been near in tears, right? And being in rooms where it was never created for you. But me being who I am and being the team player and keeping your head down and I'm going to show up and I'm going to be the best I can be, it doesn't take away from you. It's just that your environment was never created for you. Putting in place definitely creates that environment for the young Muslim women.
I'm really glad that you said that, keeping your head down and going above and beyond, because that takes us to our next segment that I want to talk about. And before I forget, we have announcements at the end, so stay tuned. So,
Mhm.
the next part that I want to go to, we're going to talk about toxic work environments, toxic bosses. There's a lot of bad advice that we're given. In hindsight, they're bad, but when you're being given that advice, it's the best advice around, so you follow it. And so, we are going to go through 5 things that we should stop doing in toxic work environments because they're doing more harm than good. And we're going to count down. So 5 is what I want to talk about. And I think you already said it, is bending over backwards, going above and beyond. And the mantra, the best advice that you're given as a woman of color, work twice as hard, bend over backwards, do everything you can.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
So I'll tell you, at one of the positions where I used to work 18-hour days, and it was like a badge of honor to work long days. If you work 12, it's like, they worked 12 hours today. That's so cutesy. Versus, the 16-hour shift, the 18-hour shift, the 20-hour shift. I remember one night wanting to leave because I had gotten so exhausted and couldn't even function. I literally remember telling myself, I'm not even a doctor. For me to do this, I'm not on a 24-hour call. I'm not Dr. Hussein. What am I doing? And looking at my boss and being like, hey, I'm ready to go. And he's like, you're leaving? And this was after like a 16-hour shift. And I was going on 17 hours. And I was like, yeah, I'm leaving. And he's like, you can't leave. We still have things to do. And I was like, 17 hours. I mean, what more can I get done? So I stayed and I worked 20 hours that day. And people talked about it, and it was a badge of honor, and it was high fives, and it was congratulating me. And it was, man, you made it. But it also came with a price tag, right? I got in the car and I lived an hour away from my job at the time, and I couldn't drive. I could not drive. So I literally slept in the car and told my supervisor to wake me up. And I think I got like a 2.5, 3 hour max hour of sleep, and then went right back in and continued to work until midnight the next day. Now that I no longer do that, right? Now that I no longer do that, sometimes when they call me, I'm like, please don't call me. Like, I'm so embarrassed that I that I had to work 18, 20-hour days and I slept in my car. Like, don't remind me of that. But it was such a very toxic work environment that accomplishments and being the best that you can be, and being the golden child, equated to working long hours as a badge of honor. And that was just something from a mental health standpoint, from a physical standpoint, not being able to drive back home, potentially putting other people's lives at risk, almost getting into accidents, almost running into a tree. That's where the negatives came in. So no matter how much I was being praised at work, I was struggling mentally. I was struggling physically and emotionally. And I finally looked up one day and I said, well, it doesn't make me a better supervisor. It doesn't make me a better manager. It doesn't make me a better operations manager. All it's really doing is getting me super exhausted and putting my safety at risk. So I think there came a point where I had to choose myself. And now it's like you work the Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. to 3:30, off every weekend. And it's been quite the change in being able to get more stability.
That's one of the signs of toxic work environments, is that you using common sense and saying, I'm going on hour 17, and a boss saying, you're leaving, like you're done, making you feel bad for being human and for being tired.
Yep. I didn't even eat that day. That was the crazy thing. I hadn't eaten that day. And I remember looking at him and being like, is it okay for me to go eat? And he looks at me and he goes, broski, you can go eat. You just can't leave. And I was like, okay. So I was so thankful that he let me go eat. I was like, this is
Wow.
great.
That's toxic.
Yeah.
So number 5, don't
Do it.
bend over backwards.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. Okay, because at the end of the day, it puts you at risk and doesn't change anything, right?
Mhm.
All right. Number 4 is blurring work and personal relationships. And I'm going to ask you a question about the story that you just told us.
Okay.
So first of all, how many hours were you contracted to work per day? Do you guys have a certain number of shifts? You're supposed to work 12 hours, 14 hours.
It's supposed to be 8 hours. So I'll say this. In the beginning, it was supposed to be 8 hours. And because we were such a new facility and we were such a new team, we knew that we needed to put in more hours, right? And then we went to like four-day work week. And so then we knew that it was 12-hour shifts, right? But those 12 hours quickly turned into 17, 18-hour days. With a quick turnaround. So living an hour away, many times I'm like, okay, it's much cheaper for me to get a hotel and sleep nearby, or for me to sleep in my car for a couple of hours and then come back. And we used to do inventory at a certain time where the whole facility would be down. So then I would take the last 2 hours of that inventory time, or the last 3-4 hours, however long it lasts, and I would finish sleeping in my car. So I would sleep maybe about 3 hours in the morning, and then 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours additional during our inventory times.
Okay. So when a boss tells you you're supposed to be working 8 to 12 hours and you're going on hour 17 and says, no, you can't go anywhere, what is that like? And what stops you from saying this is unsafe, or I've met my hours, I'm going to come back?
I think that level of like fear, right? Where you're like, okay, am I going to be judged for this? Will it affect my performance? Will it affect how people view me? I remember staying at work for 20 hours one day, and it was one of our senior directors who came back and was like, yeah, you guys did a perfect night tonight. And that's the expectation moving forward. But what she didn't know is that I had done 20 hours. So she quickly heard about that like later on in the afternoon. And she was like, hey, I heard that you did all these hours, but you guys had such a great night. Keep it up. And, your first instinct is like, I'm going to keep it up. I've been told I'm doing a great job. Then you start thinking and you're like, it's not going to change. What I've done in hour 17 hasn't changed in hour 20. And it definitely didn't change at hour 8. So I think at some point I started making that decision to say, hey, no, I'll be back. I'll be back later on tonight, and then breaking away. And no one said anything for the first time. No one was like, you're leaving? What do you mean? I was like, hey, I'll be back at 5 p.m. and I would just leave.
Yeah. That reminds me, there's a principle that we teach in Defiance Academy that is basically you teach people how to treat you. Right? So you stayed for 20 hours, you had fantastic production, and leadership comes in and says, this is great, keep doing that, which means, you worked almost 3 times the hours you were supposed to. You gave them a production that they liked. The outcome is fantastic. It doesn't matter the cost, right? They realize she will work 20 hours and give us the product that we want. And therefore, she hasn't complained. She hasn't said anything. We can continue expecting that.
Exactly. And the crazy thing is when I'd actually put in my 2-week notice, some of the VPs as well as the director, they were like, it's probably because of all the hours she's been putting in. And then the director says, I commend her for doing that. I wouldn't have done that. Couldn't imagine working all those hours. There's got to be a work-life balance somewhere. And he's like, but I commend her for doing that. And I looked at him and I was like, thanks for your honesty. But I always took that with me no matter where I went moving forward, right? Moving forward, it was, hey, if the directors and the VPs are not willing to do that, it's just something that I'm not willing to do as well. I can always respect the people that do those hours, but at the same time, it comes with a hefty price.
And that's the thing is, even if you did stand up and you gave the feedback, then that's number 3 is giving feedback, right? If you're giving feedback and saying, no, this is too dangerous. I mean, you spoke up, you said, I'm going on hour 17. And is it that same director that told you I wouldn't have done that, who said you couldn't leave?
Yeah, it was the same director.
All right. So when you took action and you gave your 2 weeks notice, they said, oh, I wouldn't have done that either. But they were the ones that enforced the hours.
Yeah.
He's the one that enforced you to stay longer than your shifts.
Yeah. But he was also like in some ways, he also did those hours with us on most of the days, right? But on the days that counted, right? Whether it was celebrations or holidays, he wasn't around. Yet, here we were giving 1,000% of ourselves every day, just, not being able to be there for our families, not being able to show up and just showing up in a way where it's like, nope, I have work. I can't miss work. And in so many ways, it becomes your identity of who you are as a person. But having to realize that doesn't define you. I remember my last meeting that I had with the team, and I reported up to the director. Everybody was on that call, the VPs and the senior VPs, and, they'd recognized me, right? And I was like, okay, I got recognized. And they were like, hey, today's Muna's last day. We'd like to appreciate her and thank her for all the hard work she's put in. She's been here from the beginning and she shows up every day. I'm willing to put in all those hours was a comment that he also made, where he said, she's willing to put in all those hours and you guys have seen her work really, really hard. And, we're really sad to see her go. And he's like, Muna, take it away. What would you like to say? And I was like, I really definitely appreciate the opportunity. And I did, it's such a great company to work for. Appreciated the relationships that I, formed with them. And the communication and the execution and producing, because by the end of the day we were there for the numbers. But what I did tell them was, team, I just want y'all to always remember that y'all matter. When you come to work with your mindset being at 100%, not when you're exhausted, not you leave exhausted. It's not a badge of honor to work these long hours, and then to always lead with kindness and compassion. And this was a room full of VPs and directors and senior directors at the time. And one of the directors sent me a text and he was like, that's how you exit, like that mic drop. And he's like, and who else other than Muna can tell a whole team of grown men, right, in their 50s and directors and VPs at that they need to be kind and that they need to have a work-life balance. And he's like, and who got mad at you? Not one person. And, on the side, they all messaged me and they were like, thank you for speaking up.
So I'm going to push back on that a little bit. Okay. So you were comfortable saying that because you were on your way out.
Yes.
Right. And the feedback that they gave you was thank you for that because you were on your way out.
Yeah.
Now, if you weren't leaving and you were staying, would you feel comfortable bringing this up while you were staying and saying our hours are too much, we need to work less?
I don't think so. I think on days that I'd gotten super exhausted, the only way that I knew how to function was, going to take a nap in the car or going to my boss and saying, hey, I'm pretty exhausted. I'm going to go ahead and leave. I think once I started giving those boundaries and saying, hey, I'm leaving for the day and I'll be back, people understood that. But I don't think I would have been as forthright as I was in being saying, you guys, this is not a badge of honor. I mean, I've said that before where I'm like, hey, this is not a badge of honor. But to give that as a feedback and it be one-on-one or it be with the team, I definitely wouldn't have taken that risk. It's quite the risk to take.
Exactly. And that's the point that I wanted to make is we've said, number 5, don't bend over backwards. Number 4, don't blur that work relationship. This is a work relationship, right? Yep. You can go above and beyond for your family and your loved ones, but going above and beyond and sacrificing your own health and your own mentality. This work, tomorrow, if you leave, they're going to hire somebody else. They're going to fill that spot really, really quickly. So that relationship, don't blur that relationship of work and personal life. And number 3, the feedback that you give when you're at the exit door and you don't have anything to lose, you can give all the feedback, right? But when you are staying there, that kind of honest feedback has repercussions.
Oh, absolutely. Don't do it. If you're still there, do not give that feedback. And it is a blurred line, like you said. I'm sure in Defiance Academy and your level of expertise and experience, there are better ways to do it. I will leave that up to you to, let our listeners know and our viewers know what the right thing to do is when you're still in it.
Yeah, there are a lot of people that say, stand up for yourself and advocate for yourself, report to HR. And those are some of the most dangerous pieces of advice that are given to people, especially people of color, because a lot of that advice tends to backfire, right? A lot of that advice tends to backfire and put a bigger target on your back. So exit interviews are a great place to give feedback. But while you're in the situation, it's really good to assess what are the risks. What am I willing to risk? What am I willing to say? And whatever the repercussions are, I'm good with. If I'm about to leave a place, the filter is minimal, if not completely gone. And I think you said it perfectly. The way you stated it, it wasn't a grievance. It wasn't complaining. It was your mental health and your safety and your physical health is very important. So take care of yourself. You can't do your job if you're tired. You can't perform at your peak if you are not rested. And that's a really good feedback. And that's feedback that people are open to hear. But when you criticize, that's the other thing that we talk about is feedback. Feedback is one of those things that everybody gives it. Nobody knows how to give it. It's a skill to give feedback. It's a skill to get feedback, right?
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things that's not taught. Nobody teaches how to give feedback, how to get feedback. And so everybody just goes around and, speaks their mind and whoever's hurt is hurt. And a lot of the toxic bosses that we talk about, and we'll cover this in a lot more detail in future episodes, but part of that is a personality flaw. Right? A lot of bosses, they're in a position of power. There is a lack of emotional intelligence. So anytime you give feedback, right? Anytime you say this is not safe, they take it as a personal hit. Right? It's a personal attack on them instead of you talking about the work.
Yeah. It's important when you say emotional intelligence. I've been in rooms where, I'm right next to the site manager and he gives feedback and it's, hardcore feedback and the team just didn't take it very well. And I could kind of just look around the room and realize that, morale just plummeted, right? And then everybody leaves the room and he looks at me and he's like, what's the problem? And I'm like, well, the way you said that it could have been a lot better. And he's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, did you see how everyone in this room just looked down after you spoke down to them? You're talking to grown people, right? Grown men and women that choose to come to work for you and that choose to come to be here. And he's like, you think they took it that way? And I'm like, yeah, they did. I took it that way. And he's like, well, what do I do? And I'm like, I'd apologize. And, there's that level of humility when you're able to bring your team back again and you're able to say, hey, team, the way I spoke with y'all, I could have done that a lot better. I could have delivered it in a way where you guys didn't take it that way. And he's like, there's definitely opportunities. Today was just a horrible day. Let's not repeat today. And I think the team appreciated that a lot more. So that emotional intelligence is just something that I've seen a lot of people in power struggle with.
It is, and it is a skill. And even if you personally lack emotional intelligence and you haven't been raised that way, if you are in a leadership position, that's one of the skills that is learnable, right? How to give feedback, how to lead a team, how to correct someone who has done something wrong. That is a learnable skill. I see it in my field all the time. Surgeons are bullies, surgeons are loud, surgeons are abrasive and yell at people. Sometimes if you have someone who's bleeding to death and you need to get people moving and you need to yell at people to move faster and do things, there are times when it is called for, but other times you don't have to resort to that. You don't have to resort to being rude and being abrasive and being aggressive.
Yeah.
Especially for us, if I do that as a woman, it is 10 times worse than if my male colleague does it.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so that it is a learnable skill, but it has to be tailored to who you are and how it's going to be received.
Absolutely. I've been in rooms where directors have started yelling, and I think a lot of people know that I don't do well with yelling, and they'll never yell at me, right? I'm the one person who, comes to execute. But when we have rough days, I've been in rooms where people have yelled, and people know me to this point where I will just take my laptop, get up, and I'll walk out. It could be in the middle of a meeting. It could be in the middle of anything. And it's because I choose not to show up that way. And I often remind people that.
That's beautiful.
I often remind people that, like, I will literally walk away from you, come back and say, hey, let's try this again. Because I felt like, your voice was a bit loud. You're probably at a 10. I'd like for you to come down to a 2. And I hope that's okay with you. And I hope you can understand that. I feel like sometimes you just have to be honest with people. And, I'm like, let's try
You
this
do.
again. And I come with a positive attitude where I'm like, we're going to try this again. I feel like you're just really upset. You're at a 10. I'm at a 2. Like, I don't. Maybe we can meet somewhere in the middle, and then let them do some self-reflection.
Okay, I'm going to push back on that as well. If that person is at your level or that person is below you, you're either at the same hierarchy or, you're the person in position of power. That's safe. If that person has more power than you, more influence than you, that may backfire.
It can backfire. You just would have to understand how you show up. But I think everyone knew that's not how I worked. Right? That's not how you were able to get anything from me. I will not produce results based on fear, right? And I think, one of my good friends says that if you run a tight ship, that equals a toxic work environment. It scares the living out of everybody, but you produce results. And I think oftentimes in manufacturing, that's what we're used to. So walking into offices and walking into rooms and being able to, much to what you said earlier, right? You teach people how to treat you. So anyone who spoke with me, whether they were higher than me or not, whether they were senior directors, VPs, didn't matter who it was, I've always set those ground rules and saying, hey, I can sense that you're upset. I fully understand. Maybe we can talk through it. Maybe we could do a root cause analysis. I can do a breakdown analysis. Like I can do RCAs. I can do the 5 whys. I can do a fishbone diagram. We can talk about where the bottlenecks are. And I'll be more than happy to sit down and speak with you. However, I do feel like you are fully upset and this conversation really isn't going to produce any result. So I'm not sure if you would like for me to come back or if we can schedule something, but you let me know what time works for you. And I've never shied away from that. I really haven't. I haven't shied away from it.
So that's absolutely beautiful, but I want to point out what you said, right? You used a lot of engineering terminology, but it's not just engineering, it's performance improvement, actually.
Yep. methodology.
We use it in surgery. They use it in automobile industry. A lot of systems-based fields use that. The fishbone diagram, 5 whys, basically figuring out what the root cause is. That's an analytical, strategic approach.
Yes.
What normally happens is because you're an engineer and you're taught to think in a strategic way, right? You're taught to think and to speak in a strategic way. What normally happens in people who are not used to that kind of terminology and that kind of, process thinking is they get somebody yelling at them. One, they either shut down, they blame themselves and they say, this is my fault.
Yeah.
Or they start fighting with people, and that's where backlash and retaliation happens.
Yep.
Right? So there is a very strategic way of doing it. And like that analytical approach is actually part of what we teach in Defiance Academy, like the feedback, getting to the root cause. Don't get caught in the emotions. But a lot of people get caught on the emotions and respond emotionally. And that's where, if you don't know emotional intelligence, the strategic approach, the analytical approach is the safer option.
Absolutely. I think I take it for granted. Being in the manufacturing industry, we tend to often speak on processes, right? And what I tell the team all the time is it's not the people that are broken, it's the processes that are broken. So no matter how passionate we get, we always come down to a root cause analysis. If our filler was broken down for 4 hours, right, there's a reason it was broken down for 4 hours. Let's figure out the 5 whys. Let's get into a root cause analysis and so forth. And I think with the mindset that we have, we tend to move the strategic way, right? And we're not emotionally driven because we're not in that environment to be emotionally driven. Yeah, I can see that.
That's exactly why I apply strategic thinking to these scenarios, because they're nothing more than processes, right? People are involved. There's multiple different contributing factors. It's a complex system. Us navigating as women of color, as Muslim women, as Black women, as hijabis, navigating these complex fields that is not designed for us. And now we face the toxicity. It's a process to figure out, how do I maneuver through this strategically instead of getting caught up by the emotions? Which brings me to number 2, what to stop doing in a toxic environment. And that is expecting equality and fairness. Now, I'm going to ask you about your perception of equality and fairness with you navigating the workplace as a Black Muslim woman.
Equality and fairness. I think that's a slippery slope. In some ways, right? You may feel like, is this fair? Would they have done it if that person wasn't Muslim? Or if that person wasn't a Black Muslim woman? And I think oftentimes I go back to what was the intention? And, just asking about it. And I think I've gotten a lot better in being able to pull the person to the side and say, kind of like that day where I wasn't invited to those meetings. I pulled my boss to the side and I said, hey, please help me understand on why I wasn't invited and included in this meeting. And, I had an interview maybe about 30 minutes after that, and I was getting ready to go to that interview, but I wanted to take the time to connect to be able to have those effective communication. So not reacting on emotion, I think is definitely something that I've learned. I think being able to, just really understand why, what is the reason behind it? Is it something that you want to talk about further, right? Or is it something where, you make a point and people understand that point? I remember building our KPIs, which is basically our performance metric.
What's a KPI?
Yeah.
Performance indicator.
Performance indicators. But being able...
You're such an engineer.
I live off of my KPIs. Those are my numbers. I live and die by those numbers. I dream about them, I tell you. But being able to build our KPIs and what our metrics were, right? And it's just, how are we performing together as a team? So we were building that. We were literally building the whole program from the bottom up. And there was a meeting that went out, and I quickly realized I wasn't in that meeting. They were headed to a meeting, and I was like, what meeting are we going to? And then, my peer looks at me and says, oh, it's the KPI meeting. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't say anything. As always, I joined. You can always count on me to join in rooms that I'm not invited to, but I will always invite myself because I work there. So already being able to do that, and people understanding that I will walk into any room at any given time. I'm the second in command, as they call it. I'm still here, right? So I walked into that meeting and, had my laptop, and I started taking notes, and I started asking questions. And, one of the directors hadn't realized that I wasn't in the meeting. And I had a lot of feedback, and he was like, that was a great meeting. And, we leave the room, and the director and I stay back, and I'm still writing down notes. And I'm like, hey, I'll go ahead and send out the recap. And they looked at me, and, my peer was absolutely thinking, like, no one even invited you to this meeting, right? But I took it upon myself to say, hey, I'll go ahead and send the recap to the team. And the director looked at me. He was like, man, Muna, thank you so much. That's great. He still hadn't realized that I wasn't invited to the meeting. And my boss was sitting there. My boss absolutely knew that he did not invite me to that meeting. But his boss was super glad that I was there for the meeting. And he's like, man, I got to tell you, like, I'm really thankful you came to this meeting. Thank you for coming. And I was like, oh, no problem. And I sent out the recap right away. And as I finish everything, I kind of just look around. I wait, everybody left, and it was my boss, his boss, and just myself. And I was like, hey, I realized that I don't have this invite on my calendar. Is it something that we missed? And he's like, the director looks up and he's like, I didn't miss it. And then I look at him and I'm like, hey, boss man, did you miss it? And he's like, yeah, you weren't on the meeting. And I said, oh, okay. May I ask why? And he's like, no, it's just one of those things where I just forgot and I was quickly putting something together and I said, oh, okay. I said, well, if you don't mind, could you please forward it to me and add me to those meetings moving forward, and setting those expectations. And I did it in front of his boss, right? But at the end of the day, it was one of those things where I will always have a seat at the table. I will always invite myself. I will always speak up. I will always follow up and follow through, but making that environment for yourself. So equality and fairness, like I said, it's a slippery slope. It's how you handle it. It can backfire. It's one of those things that it can definitely backfire, but you got to understand what the intentions behind it is.
Yeah. So every action that you take, especially if it's something bold like that, you got to know that you're taking a little bit of risk. I think we've talked about it on the podcast before. It's strategic risks.
Yeah.
Are you willing to take this action and you're okay with whatever the outcome is? If it's good, of course, you're happy. If it's bad, you're like, okay, I was willing to take that risk. But one thing I want to talk about when it comes to expecting equality and fairness, and something I see very, very often, it's an emotional response to realizing that the workplace is not fair, that it's not always equal. I have a lot of women who are in our community in Defiance Academy who come in, and their biggest frustration is, this is not fair. Why am I having to do this? Why am I having to go above and beyond to have my seat at the table? I already worked really hard. I already worked twice as hard just to get here. Why do I have to keep working harder to get the same opportunities my colleagues get just for being there? What do you say about that?
I definitely can agree. And it's just one of those things where society teaches us, right? Like, we have to work hard. And it doesn't matter where you go. You work twice as hard. You show up twice as hard. You deliver twice as hard. You have perfect numbers, like they say. I remember coming straight out of college, and for the first time ever, I'd gotten injured and coming back, and I just wasn't getting projects. And here I was, a young engineering student, straight out of college. At first, I was getting projects, but because I had gotten injured, I wasn't getting projects. I was gone for about 4 months. So coming back, there was a young lady who also was an engineer, and she was getting all the projects. And I would go into these engineering meetings, and nobody would give me projects. And I'm like, okay. And so my boss would come back, and he's like, hey, you don't have a project. And I'm like, none of the engineers gave me a project to do. And he would just look at me and be like, those are excuses. And I'm like, yeah, they are. So I took it upon myself to, I literally started going on night shift, and I started working with the team, and every issue that they had, I started tracking patterns and looking for trends. Are we down for the same issue every time? And then I made those projects. And so I ended up solving one of the biggest projects that we had, or one of the biggest downtime issues, which became a project which had a capital saving, and it was $180,000 a year worth of savings. So I ended up, just from learning from that experience and being able to give myself that project. And then the next engineering meeting that we had, I used that as my project, and I was the only one who came out with results that actually was good for the company, that saved the company some money, right? Cost saving. And that's when the rest of the engineers in the room definitely understood that, hey, you have to be able to give people opportunities, right? It's not fair. It's not a fair world. When you sign contracts, it doesn't say that everyone around you is going to be fair to you. You definitely have that emotional outburst and that emotional, I think for me, it was a shock. It was a culture shock. Like, people are not giving me an opportunity, but no one owes you that opportunity except yourself, and to work hard for it. But once you do, I think it definitely gains that level of respect from your peers and those above you, where they start to realize that you are an individual and a team contributor.
And I think, nobody owes you opportunities, but the sentiment amongst a lot of women is, you worked hard to get to that position, to be given opportunities.
Yeah.
And so it's part of the job requirement, right? Yeah. You worked hard to get there, and now for whatever reason, whether people have connections and they're giving opportunities to their friends and whatnot, that culture shock of, not knowing the workplace is like this. I have a student who, she was a nursing student and went into the workplace and started experiencing a lot of hostility in the workplace and how the doctors were treating her and other nurses were treating her. And it was a shock to her that people that are in medicine, doctors and nurses that are in medicine, it's an altruistic field where people spend their whole lives learning how to take care of other people, that they would have those kind of tendencies, that they would be racist and they would be Islamophobic. Right. And so it is a culture shock. And one of the reasons why I created Defiance Academy and we teach the things the way we do is if you spend a lot of time getting shocked and you're emotionally responding, you can't strategize. Right? We talked about this a lot. But when you know what you're walking into and you're prepared, you're like, you know what? I'm walking into a landmine, right? I know how to step strategically and I know not to expect fairness. And you're not going to spend a lot of time and energy, waste a lot of time and energy dealing with the emotional consequences of realizing, no, your hard work doesn't guarantee success. Your hard work doesn't guarantee opportunities. And so number two, we talked about, so we're down to number two now, things not to do in the workplace is to come there expecting equality and fairness.
Yeah, do not expect it. I think it's more so about creating your own opportunity. And as you create them, stand firm in them, document them, and then be sure to speak up about it and say, this is what I've accomplished, and don't shy away from that.
Absolutely. And now this brings us to our final thing not to do in a toxic workplace. But this is very controversial and it'll take another 2 hours to discuss, and we're not going to do that today. But it is changing the work environment. You're in a work environment that is toxic and they're having you work 20 hours when you're supposed to be working 8 hours, and taking on the responsibility of changing that environment. What do you say to that? How did you approach it? Or did you even think about, okay, this is unsafe, we can't do this, we're going to take actions and we're going to take steps to change this environment?
I think we went from like 8-hour shifts because we were already working those long hours, right? Then we started saying, okay, we're just going to do 4 days a week, 12-hour days. And that seemed feasible, right? Where it was my peer and I, where we're like, hey, this isn't safe at all. Her and I were dying. Like, we were working off of fumes just to get things done. And she's like, hey, Muna, we're going to tell them that we're working 10 to 12-hour days. And then I was like, oh, I don't think they'll go for 10. Let's try 12. So then we did 12-hour, 4 days a week. And then we started telling, instead of coming in first thing in the morning and being here until midnight, we're going to start 10 a.m. to, 10 p.m. So then we started telling them what we were going to start working. And we started training up our supervisors. We started training up our team leads. We started training up our customer service representatives and being able to equip your team to be able to work and be efficient without you. That's what a good, true leader is, right? That in your absence, your team can still function. Your team can still work. So once we built that, we started telling them, hey, we're going to 12-hour shifts. We're doing 4 days a week. We're coming in at 10 a.m. and we're leaving at 10 p.m. And at first it was like, what are y'all doing? And it's like, we literally I don't know who we thought we were at the time, but we brought in the directors. We brought in our managers. We brought in the site manager. And we're like, hey, this is what we're going to do from now on. And I was like, well, we're exhausted. And if you guys need us to run this place and it's just me and her, we're going to have to be okay with the schedules we put out there for you. This is when production's the heaviest, right? We thought it through. We thought about the lighter days. And I think, the team fully understood, but I also think that they respected our decision and our ability to put our foot down to be able to say, nope, we're only doing 12-hour days. Now, did we do 12-hour days is a different story. We didn't do 12-hour days. But it was the fact that we brought up the idea that they agreed to, right? So the days that we did 12-hour days, they were so proud of us that we left on time. So it kind of worked out.
All right. So, but you were in a leadership position to make that. When you weren't in a leadership position, when you were at the bottom of the totem pole.
Yeah.
How equipped do you feel to change anything?
Probably not that equipped. When I was a supervisor, I definitely kept my head down and just worked the hours I was asked to work. I've had the opportunity to work in places where we were just starting up new facilities. So for us, those long hours were something that we were truly used to. And we didn't know anything different. We didn't know anything better. We never spoke up. I remember one time our manager texted us. She texted me, she said, where are you? And I had just stepped out to get, to go use the ladies' restroom. And I mean, she calls me right away and she's like, hey, where are you? And I'm like, yeah, ladies' room. And then she's like, well, I need you to hurry up. And I was like, yeah, I'm on my way out. And just having to rush to get out. And it's just one of those things where like you worked on fear and you thrived on fear and you succeeded on fear. And, some days you failed on fear. But being a supervisor and being at that level, definitely wouldn't have spoke up. It's just one of those things where you tend to just continue to push through and try to push up through the ranks to get a better lifestyle and a better work-life balance.
Yeah. A lot of people get frustrated and spend a lot of time and energy trying to change a toxic workplace. That supervisor came in and said, oh, you guys did a wonderful job, had a wonderful night. Keep doing that regardless of what it costs you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So trying to change that kind of environment where the top obviously is going to benefit from you giving it your all, your health be damned. It's really hard to take on that mantle. Now, there are situations that are unique and specific. And even if you are not in a position of power where you speaking up and advocating for change is essential, right? And I've gone through that where I was a medical student paying money to attend school and I was being told you can't come into the operating room because you got to take off your hijab, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of things where it violates your rights and your freedom of religion and freedom of, however you want to dress. When I was pregnant, as a resident, I was being told quit, quit, quit all the time, right? And the change was I had to fight to change. So we have a maternity leave policy. Now, there are unique situations where, you can't go from place to place because the challenges are going to be the same, right? The challenges are going to be very, very similar. And so there are times when you do have to stand up and advocate for change, but it has to be done knowing what you're risking. If it's something that you will not compromise, that this is not a negotiable thing, then by all means, you stand there and fight. But trying to change an environment where the culture is so ingrained, it's a personality thing, they benefit off of you working nonstop hours, and it's a culture of silence where everybody understands what's going on, but nobody was going to say it out loud. Those kinds of things, it may be a waste of time for you to try and spend all that time and energy trying to change it.
It's funny you say that. I remember a time where I was actually in an interview and one of the leadership asked me, he said, how does your community feel about your success? And I was floored at the question. And I looked at him and I was like, well, sir, I never had the opportunity to ask my community. I was too busy going to school and working. And I meant that. I meant it with every being in me, right? And I still ended up getting an offer, which I was like, this has got to be a joke. He actually personally called me, and he wasn't even my boss at the time. He actually personally called me because the boss was out, and he's like, hey, we wanted to extend an offer, and, HR will get with you. And I was like, wait, is this? And he was like, yeah, it's me. And I was like, oh, okay.
So there's different takes on that. I think a lot of people genuinely are curious and ask questions like that, and it's coming from not such a bad place. Yeah. But sometimes we're so wired to get offended that we say, how dare you?
No, I was just floored, right? And I got the job, and I remember my first day. He
asked openly?
Yeah, and then I remember the first day, he actually came up to the front to greet me. And he was like, we're so excited to have you here. And I was like, okay. And it was just one of those things, though, right? That like you come to work and you perform and you execute and you deliver and you give a result. And he was able to respect that no matter what I wore or what I, how I decided to show up that day, I would get and deliver results. And so, there were comments that he would make, like it was like the first Ramadan with the company. And I kid you not, they set up a whole feast and they thought that I wasn't going to eat for 30 days. And so they were like, hey, Muna, keep eating up. Like, we need you to eat up. You need to eat. Like, this is going to be a rough month for you. And I was so confused because I was like, okay, I genuinely appreciated the gesture. But what do y'all think I'm going to do for the next 30 days? And they were like you're not eating, Muna. I don't get it. We don't understand why you're
hibernate like a bear.
I don't, to this day, it was dumbfounding. But it was such a very sweet, genuine gesture that they did, right? But it was up to me to be able to educate them. Right. So I'm like, listen, y'all need to take this food home. Y'all need to feast on it more than I do at this point. I was like, or we're feasting together. I take half of the food, y'all take the other half. But it was definitely educating.
This is so funny. I was at an interview one time and it was a 2-day interview. Me, the kids, and like everybody, we were flown out there to take a look around, and it was like my second set of interviews. And the second day, they're having me tour one of the hospitals, and one of the guys says, Dr. Hussein, I had a dream last last night that you moved here and you made us ethnic food. And
Ethnic food. That's great.
he's like, you made all this ethnic food that I have never tasted in my whole life. And he was like, it was delicious. He was like, we're really excited to have you here. I
Absolutely.
was like, oh, you're interviewing me to be a fellow surgeon, but the thing you're looking forward to is my ethnic food.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think back from, the days earlier in my career to, being in an interview where people are openly talking about that.
Yeah.
I think it says a lot.
It does.
It says a lot that somebody thinks that, Ramadan is 30 days of no eating and they create you a feast.
Yeah, it was a whole feast. And then I think the sun was about to go down and they were like, "Hey, it's happening." And I was like, "What's happening?" And they were like, "Time is ticking, like you can't eat after the sun goes down." And so just the fact that they had it backwards was another thing, right? And then I felt like I spent the
Your
next
hibernation is about to begin, Mona.
and then I felt like I spent the next 30 days lecturing them about what Ramadan truly is and how it's celebrated and how you actually eat during the night. And that's when you have a feast, right? It's definitely come a long way from where we first started.
And that's a beautiful note. We're coming to the end. Is a lot of people think toxic work environments, the only option you have is leave.
Yeah.
I've been through my fair share of toxic work environments, and it's a lot of them. And what I found is that if you can know when to stand up for yourself, when to protect yourself, when to
Absolutely.
speak up,
Yeah.
when to say this is not worth my energy. I have a story of a very toxic work environment that almost made me quit. Ended up being one of my favorite places. And when I was leaving, they were throwing me a party and we were all crying.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of people tell you,
Yeah. No, I love that.
it's the story. It's going to be in the book, inshallah.
Inshallah.
But, it's one of my favorite stories to tell. One of my friends, two of my friends that I still message with are from that time in my career. And it really irritates me when people, as soon as we start talking about toxic work environments, the only advice that people give you are either work hard, improve yourself, and show them how not to treat you, and all these things that we talked about, or quit. It's not worth it, quit. If you're facing the same challenges because of who you are and because of your intersectionality, you're going to face the same situation at another workplace. Then what are you going to do? You're going to keep moving from job to job to job. And so this is why we need strategy and why we need to know what we're walking into. And instead of doing these coping mechanisms, to equip ourselves with strategy.
Yeah, much to what you said, right? In the end, it's so funny because after the 30 days of Ramadan, they quickly learned about Eid. And because I never was like, I thrived on coffee. On the day of Eid, they actually bought me a coffee machine as an Eid gift. And they were like, "Hey, listen, now you can eat, now you can drink." And we wanted to celebrate that. And I was like, okay. So, and then they did yet another feast. And they were like, "Hey, this feast you can have every day until the next Ramadan." But it was just a thought process, right? And them learning about it and accepting you in areas that were never built for you, in environments that weren't built for you. But it's how you react to it. It's how you show up to it. You can take that opportunity and say, "I am going to show up in a positive way and I'm going to change the thought process that people may have around Muslim women that share the same environment as them, whether they're Islamophobic or they just don't know enough about the religion or enough about you as a person." But it's about how we show up. I once had a plant director who told an associate that was leaving, she was like, "I'm leaving because you guys give me a hard time." And he looks at her and he goes, "Okay, I wish you all the best, but just know when you go to your next job, you're still taking yourself with you." And it was his way of saying it's going to follow you. You are the problem. The problem is going to follow you, right?
It's not us, it's you.
Yeah, but it was such a nice way. He was like, "Just remember that." So I always like to tell people, remember that. It's how you show up. It's how you lead. It's how you communicate. It's using those strategic methods to be able to have those tough conversations. And then lead with positivity, kindness, and compassion. Absolutely.
Having those tough conversations, that's one of the things that we work on. A lot of people are taught to shy away because nobody teaches you how to have a tough conversation. It's very emotional. It's difficult. It's challenging. It brings up a lot of, you don't know how the other person's going to react. But all in all, it's a skill.
It is a skill.
It's a skill that's learnable. It is a skill that you can learn and you can build, which brings me to the announcements that we have. So we have now opened the strategy room. The strategy room is the membership of Defiance Academy, which we have been building for quite some time. It is a room where we not only talk about the challenges that we face in the workplace as women of color, as multiple intersectionalities that aren't necessarily easily fit into women women's empowerment and DEI conferences where the sole focus is on the identity of being a woman. A lot of the challenges that we face are racial, are hostility for any other reason. And these spaces tend to focus on the more comfortable topics of wage gaps and leadership gaps. But the hostility that we face, the toxic work environments that we face, the culture of silence that we face, the backlash that we face isn't necessarily addressed anywhere else. So the concept of the strategy room is for us to not only talk about these things, but to help you strategize around them, to help you go into your workplace with your eyes wide open, to not be blindsided, and to deal with the emotional repercussions of going through these situations on your own. And so we have women in medicine already in there. And when you learn from other people's experiences, it makes your preparedness so much richer. So we are open, we are enrolling. I can't wait for you guys to join. It is going to be a fantastic room. And I invite you to join that. All right, Mona, thank you for sharing your story with us.
I think this was definitely needed. Growing up, had I had a workshop or had I had, rooms to join or a mentor to look up to, I think I would have been better equipped for my 10 plus years of journey in engineering. Now I definitely don't lead with emotions and more strategic. So really excited, for the younger generation to be able to tap into this and really look into what it's like to work in the engineering field and medical field and what the expectations are and how similar they are in the challenges that each one of us face. So I'm pretty excited for, the communities that it will reach and the communities that we will impact, even if it's just one woman out there. But super excited.
Inshallah, it'll be a lot more than one woman. Thank you for sharing your story. I appreciate you for coming on, and I appreciate you. I know it took a while for you to get on the podcast, but I'm glad you agreed to share your experience and your expertise. Inshallah, the link to the strategy room is going to be in the show notes. You can also submit questions by going to the link for the podcast. The best questions will become an entire episode that we will discuss and we will dissect. Thank you. See you on the next session of the Defiant Career.